Well now, good day to you friends. Seamus here on April Fool's Day. How appropriate for me. And I have for you today a delightful story about fools. But as you all know by now, I do love a good love story. So here we have a bit of a foolish romance, a romance involving fools. Call it what you will. But this is the tale of three fools and a wedding. Our story begins countless years ago on the edge of the great farmlands of jolly old England. And in a little village, there lives a young man by the name of John. His father's a blacksmith. He's learning the trade. A good, stout-hearted young man, loves his family and loves those around him and loves everything about his community. Not that far outside of town, there's a lovely farm. And on that farm, there's a lovely young lady, and her name is Maggie. And of course, John and Maggie have been looking at each other for many years. From the time that they were barely into their teens, they've been aware of each other. And for the last several years, John has been dealing with Maggie's mother and father about the idea of courting and getting to know each other better. And the courting was finally allowed. And now the courting has gone on for a time that John has now approached Maggie's parents with the idea of them being joined in holy matrimony. And they've agreed. And the date's been set just a month or so down the road where John and Maggie will join their hands before the congregation and give their pledges to each other and begin life as man and wife. Oh, what a lovely thing. What a lovely thing it is. But something happens to Maggie's father in his thinking about the fact that he's now going to have a married daughter. And a married daughter means maybe grandchildren. And who knows what that can mean to his life. And just a few days after the betrothal was announced, he went out in the morning to do his chores, and he had cared for the cows, and he had fed the chickens, and he had brought in the eggs, and he went out to get a bucket of water to pour out for his piggies. And when he walked to the well, for the first time in many, many years, he looked down into the well and realized just how very, very deep that well was. And for some reason, he was struck with the thought that, Maggie's getting married. Maggie and John are getting married. Maggie and John will probably have children. Oh, and what happens if they're here and the grandchildren are here and one of my grandchildren climbs up the 4 feet stone wall to the edge of my well and falls into the well? Oh no, we might never get them out. And Maggie's father goes into an absolute funk, finds himself sitting in the dirt with tears dripping off of his face, caught up in worry about a grandchild that doesn't even exist yet. Well, a few moments go by, and of course, Maggie's mother is wondering where her fella is. He's done his chores, breakfast is ready. Where is the silly old sod? So out she goes, and sure enough, she sees her husband sitting in the dirt by the well. And she walks over, "Husband dear, what troubles you? Why are you weeping?" And he tells her the whole thought that he had about John and Maggie getting married and having babies and the babies being there and them getting to be toddlers and one of them climbing up onto the wall. You know, the whole story. And as he tells his wife this, Maggie's mother, she starts to weep at the thought of it. And she said, "Oh, husband, how horrible would that be? Our grandchildren, our beloved grandchildren." Her daughter's not even married yet. And she sits down beside her husband and they're comforting each other and hugging and weeping and crying. And of course, at this point, Maggie's done her chores. She comes in the back door of the house. She walks to the kitchen. She sees things laid out for breakfast. No mother, no father. She goes up the front door to call them and she sees her parents sitting in the dirt by the well. And you know what happens? She walks over and asks, "Mother, father, what's troubling you? Why are you crying? What's wrong?" And they tell her in broken bits and sobs, all the things that they had been thinking about and the idea of one of her future children being a toddler and getting up onto the well and falling. Well, you know what happened. And of course, the thought of that immediately took root in Maggie's mind. And within moments, she was weeping and crying and wailing and found herself down in the dirt with her parents, weeping and bemoaning the possibility of one of her children falling in the well. And it's just at that moment that John, who was out doing deliveries for his father from the blacksmith, came up to the gate and saw his beloved and her parents sitting in the dirt weeping, and he was fraught. What could possibly be so horrible? And he leapt over the fence and he ran to him and he slid down into the dirt and he said, "Maggie, Ma, Pa, what's wrong? What's troubling you?" And of course, they all told him the whole story. And as they told him, he looked at them. And he got up off of the ground. He said, "Do you mean to tell me that the three of you are sitting here in the dirt, weeping about maybe, just maybe, a child that we may or may not have, who may or may not climb up onto the well and may or may not fall in, and you've lost your entire day over this?" And they all said, "Yes, John, yes." Ooh. And he said to them, Well, you're just the three biggest fools I've ever met in my life. And he turns his back on him and walks back to the wagon to carry on with his deliveries. And as he's going down the road, he thinks to himself, he says, I never knew this. I never knew this about Maggie's family. I never knew this about her mother and father. I certainly never would have thought this about Maggie. Charming girl, wonderful girl, intelligent girl. Wow, could this possibly happen? And as he gets home that day, he says to himself, if this is the type of family I'm marrying into, I don't know if I can marry her. I love her dearly. I want to spend my life with her. I want to make a house with her. I want to make a home. I want to make a life. And yes, I want to make babies with her. But I don't know about this. And the next morning he wakes up and realizes that he has an opportunity to fix his own thinking. And he says to himself, I will go out after chores today. I'll put on my good stout boots and I'll grab my best walking stick and I will set out across the land. It's early in the season. The crops are in. There's not a whole lot more I need to do for the next little bit. I'm going to go walk about all around our shire. I'll go from one county to the next if I have to. And I'm going to walk and walk and walk until it's time for the day for me for Maggie and I to get married. And if I don't find three bigger fools in my walk, then it'll be clear to me that Maggie and her family are the biggest fools in the land and there's no way I can marry her. So he finishes his chores, he kisses his mother on the cheek, he tells his father what he's doing, and off he goes on his walk. And he walks and he walks and he spends the whole day just walking away from the village, walking away from the smith, walking away from the farms, walking out towards the far edge of the county. He has no idea where he's going, but he walks and walks and walks. And it was maybe 2, maybe 3 days of sleeping rough under a tree and eating out of the snacks that he brought along in his bag and drinking from streams and, dodging wild rabbits or something in the creeks, that he came along a small farmstead. And looking over the rail, he saw the strangest thing. He saw the farmer standing in front of the big open doors of his barn with a great huge shovel in his hand, swinging the shovel, like he was pitching hay, but there was nothing in there, or he was shoveling grain, but there was nothing in the shovel, or that he was digging a hole, but there was nothing in the shovel. And he called out to the farmer, excuse me, sir, you seem to be in a bit of trouble there. Can I help you with anything? He says, no, I just have to keep shoveling. And John, seeing that the shovel was empty, said to the farmer, do you mind my asking, sir, what is it that you're shoveling? And he says, a few days ago, the skies got dark and the clouds rolled in and we thought sure we were going to have a horrible storm. So me and all of my lads, we went out into the field and we harvested our grain so it wouldn't be destroyed by the storm, because that grain is the food for our cows all of this coming winter. And I had to harvest the grain because without the grain, our cows would starve. So we harvested the grain and we brought it all into the barn and we piled it up. But of course, we harvested it and it was still damp. And if we don't get it dried out soon, it'll rot and I won't be able to feed my cows. So on this nice sunny day, I'm trying to shovel sunshine into the barn to dry my grain. John says to the farmer, you're shoveling sunshine. Could you not just grab your sons and your workers and bring the grain back out of the barn and spread it out on this sunny day and let it dry that way? Well, the farmer looks at him and he says, young man, you are you are like a wizard. That's the most beautiful, wonderful, intelligent thing I've ever heard. And immediately he called his sons and he called his workers and they began to drag all that piled grain out of the barn and spread it out into the sun so it could dry. And John just shook his head and turned back onto the road thinking to himself, that's one. I need to find 2 more. And off he went. Well, a few days later, he had no idea where he was. He had wandered off of so many highways and byways. He knew he was in a different county, and he found himself coming down a road. And sure enough, alongside the road there was a split rail fence, and on the far side of the fence, there was cows. And as he watched, he saw the farmer from that farm squeezing himself between the rails of the fence with a cup in each hand. And he watched as the man took 2 or 3 steps down to where there was a stream. And he dipped the cups into the stream. And then he went back up and he squeezed himself through the rail fence. And he dumped those cups into an old stone watering trough. And he watched as the man slipped out through the rails again, picked up the 2 cups of water, went back and poured them into the trough. And after 2 or 3 more times of this, John asked him, he said, excuse me, sir, may I ask, what you're doing today seems a bit unusual. What are you doing and why? And the second farmer says to John, he says, well, you see, on the far side of my paddock where I keep my cows, there's always been a stream. But for some reason this year it's botched up, it's closed, it's not flowing. I don't know what's wrong. And I've got this other small stream here, and there's a watering trough that my grandfather used years ago that's never been used for ages. So my thought was that I could just slip through the rails of the fence and I could bring water in, and I could put that water in the trough, and then I could calm my cows. And John said, well, could you not use a bucket? Well, I could, but my bucket's at the far side of the field and somebody else is using it. And I really had to get water for my cows. I love my cows. My cows are my wealth. I had to take care of my cows. And John looked at the farmer and he looked at the rail fence and he said, no disrespect, sir, but could you not just lower the rail of the fence and lead your cows to the stream? Whoa, my land. What an intelligent young man you are. What a brilliant idea. Why didn't I think of that? And without saying anything else, he turned and he started to call his cows and he lifted down the rail of his rail fence to make an opening and he let his handful of cows down to the stream and they all watered and they were happy as, well, cows. And John walked away thinking to himself, that's two. Well, several days went past. He was more than halfway through the month that he had until he was supposed to marry Maggie. And he thought that one way or the other, he should be heading his way home. And he had taken a somewhat roundabout route. And now he was coming back around onto a road that would lead towards his parents' smithy at the edge of the town. And he walked by and he thought surely there couldn't be anything more foolish than a farmer that shoveled sunshine and a farmer that filled a trough with a teacup. But as he was walking down the road, he saw a small homestead, a small kitchen garden, a little bit of a farm, and sure enough, there was a few cows. And as he looked up on top of the house, the cottage, if you will, which had a lovely sod roof with wildflowers and tall grasses, he saw the farmer standing there on the edge of the roof with a rope. And the rope led down to the ground. And on the ground, he saw that rope was tied around the neck of the cow. And he watched as his farmer strained and pulled and pulled and strained and strained and pulled and pulled and strained. And John realized that what this farmer was trying to do was pull his cow from the ground up onto the roof. And as you can imagine, the cow was not happy. The cow was all, a very, very unhappy cow. And John couldn't help it because John loved cows too. And he went in and he said to the farmer, he said, excuse me, sir, your cow seems to be in great distress. Is there anything I can do to help? And the man said, oh, no, it's not the cow, it's the roof. Excuse me, sir, it's the roof? What do you mean? And he says, oh, yes, he says, I haven't tended to this roof properly for several years. And as you can see, it's a lovely sod roof, but now it's overgrown with wildflowers and tall grasses. And my thought was that I could bring my cow up onto the roof of the house and it could eat the tall grass and the wildflowers and it would get a free meal and I would get a well-trimmed roof. John looked at the farmer and he says, do you not think that perhaps you could just take that scythe sitting by your barn door and go up onto the roof and mow the tall grasses and wildflowers and just throw them down for your cow to enjoy it? It might be easier than trying to pick up, 700 or 800 pounds of cow. And the farmer said, that's a great idea. That's a wonderful idea. It would probably save me the life of another cow because this didn't work yesterday either. And John was aghast to realize that this man had actually killed one of his cows trying to pull it up by its neck onto the roof. Well, the man let go of the rope. John handed him the scythe. The farmer immediately started to scythe the tall grass and the wildflowers, which fell right in front of the cow. And the cow immediately began to eat, and everything was fine. And as John walked away, he said to himself with great joy on his way home, there's three. And clearly Maggie and her family are not the greatest fools in our county. And he made his way home. Well, all went well. He returned to his parents. He had a good meal. He had a good sleep. He picked up his chores. All went well. The announcements were made, and sure enough, it was the wedding day for John and Maggie, and they got married. And you don't need to know what happened. They got married. It was wonderful. They had a great time. And there was feasting and food and fun and frivolity, and everything went well. And that night, at the end of the night, John and Maggie went back to her parents' farm, where a small cottage had been set up to live in as husband and wife. And the next morning, they woke up. And the sun was shining, and the birds was chirping, and everything seemed well in the world. And of course, John and Maggie and her family all lived, well, not quite yet. Because that morning after breakfast, the first thing John did as a married man, well, on the morning after his wedding, was he went out into the yard, and he built a fence around the well. And then John and Maggie and all of those they loved, then they all lived happily ever after. I hope you do enjoy a lovely, joyful, hilarious April Fool's Day. I myself love being a fool, and I hope I gave you a bit of a chuckle today. Please take good care of each other, be kind to each other, and until we meet again, I bid you peace. Cheers.